Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Education 438, teaching reading and writing in the content area. This is your week 9 and reflection number 2 overview video. I hope that everybody had a great fall break. I had a bit of an unexpected family emergency happen, and everything is fine now, but I am playing catch up a little bit, so I apologize if I'm a little bit behind on grading. I think you all know me well enough to know that I will get everything I can back to you with great feedback as soon as I can. So as always, this video is going to follow the same format we usually do. I'll start with a recap of week 8. I'll move into our week 9 topics, our week 9 learning objectives, some essential questions for you to consider as you read. And then I'll talk a little bit about your reading videos and assignments. And then I will spend a little bit of time on reflection number 2, talking about that. Even though it really is similar to our first reflection, so if you felt confident with that and happy with your grade, it's very, very similar. So let's jump in and get started. Last week, we talked about helping students understand and remember word meanings. We talked about specific activities for building vocabulary comprehension and ownership in the secondary classroom. Did some reading and some video watching on selecting and building vocabulary activities around Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. And then finally, something that you all know that I'm very passionate about, multimodal learning and the importance of multimodal instruction in the secondary classroom. So I mentioned this last week, but week 8 was kind of our last week that's very, very vocabulary focused. This week, we're going to be moving into a little bit more work with close reading and working with the reading CCSS standards. So before we do that, I just want to give you my big takeaways from last week. So a huge takeaway for me as I was watching last week's videos, rewatching them, and rereading the chapter that I assigned, I was just kind of reminded how important it is to not just choose vocab words kind of surface level or because we're in a hurry and we just need some words to teach. So when I first started teaching, I was always really overwhelmed with choosing vocabulary. So I feel like I just sort of chose words that appeared in the text without really giving a lot of thought to whether these words were tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3, and without giving a lot of thought to what words in particular would benefit my students both in the classroom, outside of my classroom and other disciplines, and in their everyday lives. So I think as we're winding down in terms of vocabulary instruction or our talk in terms of vocabulary instruction, I want you to think about just being very mindful about choosing vocabulary words, right? Thinking about how many, thinking about words that students can utilize across disciplines, in discipline-specific language, and in their own lives. And I also am constantly reminded of how important it is to think about these strategies that we choose to teach words as well. And hopefully, our last 2 to 3 weeks have given you a lot of strategies to think about in terms of vocabulary instruction. My next two big ways, big surprise, are of course related to multimodal instruction. So I can't get across how much I think that multimodal instruction does two things. I think that it benefits all learners, right, by giving them a variety of instructional strategies to use to respond to content and to learn content. But I also think it speaks to individual learning styles. So with multimodal instruction, you're honoring the ways in which your individual students learn, but you're also providing every single student in your classroom with a bevy of different instructional strategies in which they can learn and interact with content. So I think that's so important. And then just like I think being mindful about vocabulary instruction is important, so do I think being mindful about multimodal instruction is important. A lot of times I've seen teachers, and I've been guilty of this too, especially in my early teaching days, of just utilizing technology or digital tools for the sake of using them without really being mindful about how those digital tools, how that tech was enhancing my lesson, was making content more accessible. So I think technology and digital tools are wonderful things to implement in the classroom, but being mindful of them and being meaningful about them is so key, right? So thinking about how they relate to your teaching goals, to what you want your students to be able to do, and making sure that you're using these incredible tools that we have at our fingertips, right, in ways that are going to be beneficial for students and meaningful for students. Okay, week 9 topics. We are moving this week into close reading, and in doing so, we are returning to one of our earlier texts. Here it is, Getting to the Core of Literacy. We are returning to this text, but more importantly, we are starting one of our other class texts, which is a close look at close reading. So, our big goal this week, our big topic this week, is to think about close reading as an instructional strategy. We are also going to deep dive into the Common Core State Standards reading standards in particular. We're going to understand and evaluate text complexity. So we'll talk a lot about what it means to choose a complex text and the measures in which we decide whether a text is complex or not. I'm going to have you do some reading and thinking about teacher and reading roles in the close reading process. And then going back to this text with getting to the core of literacy this week, I'm going to have you browse a lot of sample lesson plans that align with CCSS reading standards. So, learning objectives. You will familiarize yourself with close reading as an instructional strategy through reading about the CCSS reading standards, text complexity, and the role of both teacher and reader in the close reading process. You will browse through multiple examples of lessons that align with the reading standards through selecting a reading chapter within Getting to the Core of Literacy that speaks most closely to your disciplinary field. This learning objective makes me giggle a bit. So you will understand how close reading differs from other types of reading instruction through close reading, a chapter about close reading. It's very meta, right? But yeah, we're doing a lot of reading about close reading, and hopefully, I think you will be very kind of metacognitive about the process of close reading as you're close reading. You will examine concrete examples of a close reading strategy, considering how Avid's marking the text approach can lead to deeper text comprehension. I'm including an Avid strategy this week because it's a strategy that I have used time and time again across a multiplicity of disciplines that I've taught in order to get students interacting closely with a text in 3 really simple ways. And then you will engage in your 3rd major assignment of the semester, technically 4th, if you consider your mini lesson 1, which I do, a reflective piece in the form of your choice that synthesizes content from our last 4 weeks of reading, videos, discussions, etc. So as you're reading this week, how do I put this? I have a lot of thoughts about close reading as a strategy. Some are very positive and some are, I guess, more inquiry based. So I'm going to really task you with asking yourself some big questions this week as you read. The first one, why is it important to understand reading comprehension as multifaceted, as complex, as rooted in both context and as rooted in individual learners, right? We all read and comprehend what we read differently. How can we understand the reading standards as a set of guidelines as opposed to a scripted curriculum? I have worked for administration that really approach CCSS more as like a scripted curriculum. It is not, okay? It is a set of guidelines, and it is up to you as the instructional expert to use these guidelines in ways that benefit your students. How do we select complex texts for students to grapple with? What does that even mean in your discipline, right? And what are some measures we can use to determine the complexity of a text, right? Because it's not just how hard a text is, right? It's content, it's reader, it's task. You're going to read a lot about this week. What is close reading? So what do we mean when we say we're going to ask students to read closely? What is close reading as a strategy? What is the purpose of it? How does it differ from other types of reading instruction? How does close reading benefit students in disciplines outside of English language arts? One thing that is very unique about the Common Core State Standards is that it really pushes literacy across disciplines, as I've mentioned before. So how does close reading benefit students in a science class, in a math class, in a PE class, right? What is the role of the reader in the close reading process? What is the role of the teacher? Okay. Are there limitations or drawbacks to an overfocus on close reading? My My major issue with close reading, or at least an overfocus on it, is that close reading is really concerned with the four corners of the text. So, what is in the text, right? And it really discourages a lot of like personal connection, which I think can sometimes be damaging. So, my issue with an overfocus on close reading is that it really does benefit close analysis. And I do think it's important for that purpose, but it doesn't step outside of the four corners of the text. And so, I think it's really important to balance close reading with other types of reading, like reader response reading, prior knowledge-based reading, right, that really incorporate personal experience, different kind of epistemological understandings into the reading process. So, yeah, I don't want to say too much because I don't want my thinking to kind of sway how you are interacting with close reading this week as you learn more about it. But I do want you to think about those limitations or drawbacks to an overfocus on it. Okay, so that's what we are kind of thinking about, reading about, talking about this week. No required Zoom meeting this Wednesday. This week is very reading heavy. So I obviously want you to focus on your reading and I want you to focus on working on your second reflection. So some reminders, obviously, your responses to your pod group members' fourth post will be due October 19th by 11:59. And then your reflection, your second reflection will be due same day and time as well. So let's go ahead and talk about that reflection. Before I do that, I have obviously our module overview up here, our topics, our objectives. This video will pop up here. Your assigned reading, really quick. So close look at close reading. You're going to be reading the intro and chapters 1 and 2. It seems like a lot, but there's a lot of kind of graphic organizer breakdowns on how to evaluate text complexity that take up a ton of pages. So don't get too overwhelmed. In terms of getting to the core of literacy, we're going to be looking at a couple chapters that present you with lesson plans that are reading strategy focused and aligned to the reading standards, the Common Core State standards. But their chapter 3 and 4 are the chapters you're going to decide between. ELA, math, PE, art teachers, just decide which one aligns more with your content area. History, social studies, chapter 3, science teachers, chapter 4. Okay. Then I have a PDF under this week's module of the close reading strategy I want you to think about, the AVID strategy that I mentioned. No required Zoom this week. Your assignments are already here. And then upcoming readings for next week in case you want to get ahead. All right, so I've got that close reading strategy here. And then, of course, let's jump into assignment number 2. Or reflection number 2. So this is almost identical to reflection number 1. The things that are different are obviously the readings. So remember that with our reflections, our goal is to respond to and synthesize, okay? Pull larger connections across the various texts that inform this course. It's a way for you to think about larger ideas about topics, concepts, themes, a way to track your reading, to return to your reading for later use in the secondary classroom. So last time I got a lot of kind of just regular expository reflections, which was fine. I also got some kind of outlining diagrams, some almost concept mapping, which was really cool. But if you want to try something different this time, you should. I love, like, I guess I'd call them video reflections. Vlogs are really cool. Push yourself outside of your comfort zone, maybe try something new. But remember, whatever form your reflection takes, make sure that you are referencing designating readings and media. This means direct quotes. This means specific references. The more specific you can be, the better. Please make sure that you're connecting and synthesizing big ideas, right? Some of the points that I took off in the last reflection were because you reflected on each piece, but didn't necessarily make larger connections between them. Please make sure it's readable, completed with care, includes proper in-text citations. You don't need to include a works cited page for this. I know everything that we've read, but please include specific pages, especially if you're quoting specific chapters, etc. So here's what this reflection must have. You must include at least 3 direct quotations and or specific references to the following readings. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Building Academic Language. The letters readings, there were 2 PDFs that we did during week 6, so see Module 6 for that. And then the Zweer's Chapter 7 Vocabulary Strategy chapter that we read for Module 8. So you need to reference at least 3 of those. And then you want to reference at least 2 supplemental materials. This could be Strategies to Building Background Knowledge. That was from Module 4. Question Formulation Technique for Discussion from Module 5. Costa's Levels of Questioning from Module 5. Our 3-tiered module for vocabulary instruction that we did both in Module 6 and Module 8. And then, of course, multimodal learning. So 10-point assignment, but you know that these points add up. This is not something for you to stress about, but just a way for you to kind of return to previous readings, incorporate, connect them with larger ideas that we've been discussing as a class. So please reach out if you have questions on that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I know that this video is getting really long. Hopefully it made a little bit more sense than my last week's video. I know some instructors like to actually type out their lectures and then read from them, and I just can't do that, you all. I am an organic person, and oh, look, it's Watson. Hold on. Let me let you say hi. He's a cutie. Obviously, I'm an organic instructor, and I just like to sort of let even lectures like this just kind of roll off the tip of my tongue, even though I obviously prepare before them. But I always want it to feel like a conversation and not like I'm just reading slides to you. So hopefully it does. Okay, as promised, ending now. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please reach out and I'll see you very soon.